Okay, we'll begin. Good evening. My name is Jack Anderson. I'm Professor and Director of Sports Law Studies at the University of Melbourne, and I have the privilege of chairing or moderating this session. My key task is to have this session finished by 9:30 or thereabouts, according to Jens. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to generally introduce the speakers, tell you about the format, and then sit down. Okay? And just in a general sense, and to remind us of what we're speaking about today, I think over the past day or so, at least at all the sessions I've been to, there's been healthy disagreement in many of them. In some cases, it's just been plain disagreement. But that's good. But one thing I think we can be certain of and agree on is that this topic, whistleblowing, is one that is central to the integrity of contemporary sport. And it's a topical subject, it's an urgent subject, and it applies not just in doping, but across the commercial, operational, match fixing, and so many other aspects of sport. And we're going to hear from experts in the area today. And the way we're going to do it is as follows. First of all, Bryan is going to give a presentation. Now, I'm understating it when I call it a presentation, for about 25 or 30 minutes, reflecting on the Icarus documentary and reflecting on all that is in that is relevant to what we're going to do today. So that's going to take about 25 or 30 minutes. That's going to be followed by a presentation by Damien Larin from WADA, the confidential information manager, who's going to speak for about 10 or 15 minutes on, give us an update on what WADA is trying to achieve at present in this area. And then Bonita Mersiades is going to speak. She will be familiar to you, past attendees that play the game, as a whistleblower. And she will speak in a general sense, in an intriguing, I think, title that said, the standard that you walk past is the standard that you accept. And reflecting on that and introducing our final people who will speak in our panelists are two people who did not walk past, two people who stood up. Yuliya and Vitaly Stepanov will join us as panelists when we come to the Q&A at the end. And this is an important topic we saw last week, and we recognize people like Kara Goucher, Steve Magnus, and others who contributed to various recent developments. But for that, I want to introduce and let Bryan take the stage.
Hey, great to be here. Before I get started, I was going to refresh your guys' memory and show you a little clip of Icarus and kind of tell you my journey. So, I don't know how to... I ask you questions. Is that it?
The answer, yes or no. Does Russia have a systematic statewide doping system in place to cheat the Olympics?
Yes.
Were you the mastermind of a statewide system that cheated the Olympics?
Yes.
Russia won 81 total medals in London. How many of those were dirty?
Or even more. 50% is for sure.
Was Putin aware of the existence of a Russian doping system?
Yes.
This goes all the way back to 1968. There never was anti-doping in Russia, ever.
To everything that gave credibility to the lab, do you think that I feel good today? Do you think that the agents who were cheated feel good?
I thought I'd seen a lot. Like, this is next level.
Today, the World Anti-Doping Agency suspended Russia's sports drug testing lab, and the head of the lab resigned.
They're all doping. Every single one of them. Unfortunately, the drugs work.
I know that I could change the past telling the truth.
Gregory is believed to be the #1 on Putin's kill list. They are actively hunting him. They have asked the Trump administration to extradite him.
here to get everything out.
There are KGB people hanging around the lab. You know, KGB people are not nice people.
2 people connected with the Russian doping program are already dead under circumstances that seem highly suspect.
You want to get out?
Yes.
We have to disclose.
The repercussions and political consequences are still unfolding.
It was a bombshell that has the potential of affecting the credibility of all sport and therefore the continued viability of all sport.
Dr. Rodashenkov was telling the truth. I was able to corroborate that because of all of the scientific and forensic information.
It can be a defining moment, and I think it should. Why would I watch an event that's fixed?
Respect the rules. Play fair. Be clean.
Icarus, consider truth.
So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about, before I get into the whole whistleblowing of it, just kind of my journey of how this film came to happen and kind of the steps that happened along the way. I was born in Colorado, in Denver. I dreamed of racing a bike professionally. Lance was my hero. And I started racing when I was 13 years old. I went to school in Boulder. And then I had this terrible accident when I was 19 years old. I lost 8 teeth, had a huge root canal, all my teeth were root canal, and realized that maybe cycling wasn't this, going to be my profession. And I decided to go out to Los Angeles. I get into stand-up comedy. The stand-up comedy turns into acting. The acting turns into writing. And I write this play about a Christian guy that wanted to marry a Jewish girl so he'd never have to make another decision. And it was called Utopia, and it opened in LA in 2003, and it became this huge hit. And it played for 400 shows there for a year and a half. We then brought it to New York, and it played off Broadway in a 300-seat theater for 3.5 years, becoming the longest running show in off-Broadway history. We had productions of it running all over the country, and I then decided to go and direct a film version of it, and this film version of it turns into my living nightmare. We had Jennifer Love Hewitt in the cast, and Peter Stormare, and Rita Wilson, and Tom Arnold, and Jamie Lynn Sigler, and Rita Wilson, and all these amazing comedic actors, and I took kind of bad money into the film. I took investment from a guy who was in real estate. He didn't know the film business, and when the film was done, we had an offer to sell it. He turned it down, decided that he would put it out on pay-per-view. Nobody even knew the film existed, and essentially it put me into what I refer to as director's jail. And so here I am, I'm about to turn 40 years old, and I'm without a career. I cannot get work. I'm not going to be able to direct another movie. I don't have an agent, and I'm literally broke. I'm renting out my apartment as an Airbnb in Malibu, and this is now 2013, beginning of 2013. That was actually me racing bikes at the Connie Carpenter Davis Finnis cycling camp in Copper Mountain. And it's now 2013, and Lance comes out and confesses on Oprah. And I'm sitting there and I'm going, wait, I'm not that surprised that Lance had been doping. I think everybody who was, lovers of the sport kind of believed all along that he had been doping. But the thing that was most fascinating to me and shocking to me was not that he had been doping, but how this guy had managed to not be caught. And I found myself asking this question, which was, who's to blame? Is Lance to blame? Or is the system to blame that hasn't been able to catch Lance? I mean, this guy had gotten away with, depending on the numbers, 400, 500, 300 tests, arguably clean. And I got into my mind going, I wonder if this is still possible. I wonder if what Lance did in 2013, and this is now basically all through 2013 as I'm formulating this idea, if this could still be done, and if actually the anti-doping system in sport had actually reformed, or if we were just being told that it now worked. And so I come up with this crazy idea that I'm going to, of course, I missed that the way that they actually get him, as Travis Steigerk knows, who's in the room here, is that his teammates essentially rat him out in exchange for their own immunity, so they're basically not punished. But, of course, we're able to get Lance. And, again, I'm kind of going, wait, is this the way that we actually catch people? That the only way we can catch somebody for cheating is if their teammates actually rat them out who did the same thing. And so I kind of start formulating this idea that I want to see if the system works and whether or not, an athlete who's cheating is going to get caught. And so I spend the next year of my life making phone calls. And I start calling this scientist, that scientist. I connect with the guy, Carson Lundby, in the University of Zurich, who had done all this testing on EPO and found that most of the tests for EPO didn't work. And I finally get in touch with Don Catlin, and I'm sure all of you guys in this room know who Don Catlin is. And I asked Don point blank, and I says, Don, does the anti-doping system in sport work? And Don tells me, absolutely not. And I go, wait, you're kidding me. What do you mean? He goes, well, if it works, I don't know how to catch them, because every single time that I thought somebody was clean, they turned out that they weren't clean. And I said, well, Don, do you think I could actually get through the testing if I had the right advisor? And he goes, yeah, absolutely. And I go, well, would you advise me? And he goes, absolutely not. He's go, I'm worried about my reputation, but I know this guy, and his name is Gregory Rodchenkov, and he is actually running the Russian laboratory. He actually has just done all the testing for the Sochi Winter Olympic Games, and I think he might help you. And I'm going, this seems pretty strange that the guy who's running Russia's anti-doping laboratory might be somebody who would help me. So he connects Gregory and I via email. And it's actually, as we get connected, it's actually February of 2014. So believe it or not, I'm literally emailing Gregory during the Sochi Olympics. And he's telling me, hey, I'd love to talk to you, but I'm exhausted. And when I went back and checked these emails, sure enough, the emails are coming to me at like 4 o'clock in the morning Russia time. So now we know what Gregory was doing at 4 o'clock in the morning. He was swapping out urine in the Sochi laboratory. But he says, hey, I'm going to be in Oregon in July of 2014. I'm going to be lecturing ahead of the World Junior Athletics Championships in Eugene, Oregon. And if you'd like to come meet me, I'd be happy to meet you. Now, at this point, I had not told Gregory that I wanted him to help me with the doping protocol. I didn't tell him what I was up to. I just told him that I was making a documentary film exploring the anti-doping system in sport. So I go and meet Gregory, and this is now July of 2014 in Oregon. And I decide that, I'm not going to bring cameras. I'm not going to, spook him out, because I didn't know, who he was really at the time. And we bond over these couple days. And I sit him down, and I had just a handheld camera at the time, and I said, Gregory, do you believe that it's possible for an athlete to win a gold medal in the Olympics without performance-enhancing drugs? And he goes to me, I should believe, I try to believe, but I do not believe that an Olympic medal can be won without performance-enhancing drugs. And he takes this long pause, and I'll never forget, and he goes, I don't know, maybe I'm a bad man. And I took a long pause, and I said, you think you would help me dope and get away with it? And he goes, sure, why not? And this starts the most surreal, unbelievable journey. And I come back to Colorado, and I'm now going to be training for this crazy Hope Route race. And my idea was that I'd do this race the first year clean for 7 days. It's the hardest, most masochistic amateur bike race on the planet, and I do it clean. And then I'd come back the next year, doped to the gills, with the idea that I'm going to get away with it. even though there's not all this, lots of testing at the event, I'm going to design my own protocol. I'm going to take my urine every day. I'm going to take blood samples before the race, during the race, after the race, and see if technically I would be clean. So Gregory and I make a plan after I meet him in July of 2014 that we're going to reconnect at the beginning of 2015 when I'm going to start my protocol, and he's going to advise me. So sure enough, it's now basically, it's December of 2014, and Gregory and I connect again, and he tells me, have you seen this movie with me? And I'm totally in the dark, and I go, what movie? And he sends me this link to Hayo Sepet's ARD documentary. I'm like going, Gregory, this is alleging you're a mastermind of some state-sponsored doping play. He's like, no, this is all bullshit. Don't worry about it. I said, so will you still help me dope? He goes, yeah, no problem. And again, I'm going, this is absolutely crazy. The guy's in the middle of this investigation. He's in the front pages of newspapers. There's a German documentary out on him, yet he's still agreeing to help me dope. So, of course, I go and do this race the next year, dope to the gills. I take all my blood. I take my urine. I did literally 43 different blood tests over the course of 7 months to build my biological passport. And after the race, I bring all of my urine samples. I've been freezing all my urine through this race. I mean, it was just absolutely stupid and ridiculous. I carried all my frozen urine, smuggled it into Russia. I go to his laboratory in September of 2015, and I've got 15 frozen urine samples with me. I've got all my biological passport information, and he goes, look. I'm going to help you. I'm going to get you through with all this, but shit's going down in the laboratory. I have to get to it later. So I leave Russia, and I come back, and now it's November 2015, and I'm waiting for my results back, whether or not I'm clean, this, that, and the other. And lo and behold, it's November 9th, 2015, and this is the day that Richard McLaren, Dick Town, and Gunther Younger come out with their report alleging that Russia has a state-sponsored doping program. But of course, as we know, this is only limited to track and field at the time. But the allegations are so serious that Gregory is forced to resign from the laboratory. RUSADA is immediately suspended. And within a matter of days, Russia is denying the allegations. Putin is on state television saying that if any of these allegations are true, it will be the individual that is held accountable, and punishment will be absolute. And I'm talking to Gregory as this is going down, and I'm on a Skype call with him, and he tells me, Bryan, I have to escape. And I go, what do you mean? He goes, Putin's going to kill me. And my heart drops into my stomach, and I go, what do you need? He goes, can you get me a plane ticket? And so as I'm on the phone with him, I book him a plane ticket, and I'm like, so when do you want to leave? And he's like, now. I'm like, what do you mean now? He's like, now. And I book him a plane ticket for 12 hours later for him to fly to Los Angeles. And at the time, I had no idea what he had actually done, what the scope of this was. So sure enough, I buy him this plane ticket, and as I buy him the plane ticket, I'm buying the plane ticket not because of any other reason other than this. At this point, this man was my friend. I had spent the last year of my life, he had advised me, had participated in this wacky movie that I was making. I had talked to him probably 200 times at that time. I had been at his house in Moscow. I had met his friends. I had went to birthday parties. I had met his children. I had met his dog. I mean, this was truly my friend. And he had never asked me through this entire process for a dime of money. Never asked me for anything other than he just wanted to help me show that the anti-doping system in sport as he saw it didn't work. And so he gets to Los Angeles, and he's carrying with him 3 hard drives. He gets off the plane, and he goes, take these hard drives and put it into a safe. And I go, what are these? He's like, don't worry about it. And so he's in LA for a couple months. And we're making this film. We get him a safe house. We get him a phone. We rent him a car. I mean, he's got no money. And I say, Gregory, look, if you want us to help you, you've got to be honest with us. And as he gets into Los Angeles, he had actually created this whole spreadsheet of all these things that WADA had done that was wrong, of all these reasons why he was innocent, all this stuff. And I say, Gregory, look, you got to tell me what happened. I said, I can't help you. We can't do anything unless you tell me what happened. And so over the next couple months, all of a sudden, it starts unwinding and unwinding and unwinding and unwinding. And we sit down over a series of interviews. And he tells me that he had essentially orchestrated what was the single largest doping fraud in the history of sports. That he had helped thousands of athletes dope undetected. That he had developed a 3-drug cocktail that while other athletes around the world would be caught because he had developed the test, the long-term metabolite test to catch them, the Russian athletes would not be caught. And then he told me the most shocking thing of all, that he had swapped out the urine for hundreds of athletes at the Sochi Olympic Games, and that every single medal that Russia won at those games was a fraud. And I was shocked. And not only that, he had the evidence to prove it. He had the spreadsheets. He had the emails back and forth between Minister Mutko and Yuri Nagornov and all the Russian officials. He had kept it all. He even had a picture of the hole in the wall that he used at the Sochi laboratory. He even had the blueprints from the laboratory, because this plan had started literally in 2007. As Russia was awarded the games, they decided in 2007 that they were going to cheat and that they were going to dominate these games. He had all the evidence. And as you know, this launches a huge investigation. And so we're sitting, and it's now a couple months later, and I'm sitting on this evidence. And this is really scary. Basically, at this point, the only people in the world that know this is Gregory Rodchenkov, myself, a couple people that have worked on the film with me, and we're trying to figure out what we're going to do. And we realize that this is really, really, really serious. And February 15th, 2016 comes around. And Nikita Kamayev suddenly dies of a heart attack. And the story that a lot of people in the world don't know is that Gregory had literally spoke to him not a day earlier, 2 days earlier. And Nikita had told Gregory that he was working on a book with David Walsh, the Sunday Times writer, and that he was going to blow the whistle. And Gregory told Nikita that he was crazy. He said, well, what are you doing, Nikita? You can't do this. You're in Russia. And lo and behold, not 2 days later, Nikita dies of a heart attack. And part of this story that people don't even realize is Gregory is on the phone with Nikita's wife as he's dying of a heart attack for 3.5 hours. He didn't die of a heart attack. He was murdered. So, needless to say, things are pretty scary for myself right now and Gregory, and we're figuring out what to do. And March 9th, 2016 comes along, and FBI agents show up at Gregory's little safe house in Santa Monica, and we have an apartment rented for him in the back of this house. And I mean, to this day, I have no idea how these agents found this apartment. They come knocking on the door. They're from the Eastern District of New York, and they knock on the door with their badges at 12 o'clock at night. And they serve Gregory with a subpoena to appear in front of the grand jury in the Eastern District of New York, the same jurisdiction that's handling the FIFA case. Now, what we quickly realized is that these agents didn't know what Gregory had done. They just knew that this was a person of interest. He was in this 300-page WADA report, 60, 70 pages of a report, had his name on it, and they knew he was in the United States, and they show up and they issue him a subpoena. And now we're faced with a huge decision. And the decision is that if we let him go and sit for this grand jury testimony, we don't believe that the United States has the jurisdiction to do anything about this. And why would they? I mean, how are they going to have the jurisdiction to go and get these urine samples out of the laboratory in Lausanne, Switzerland, to retest them, the samples from Sochi? How does the United States have any jurisdiction over the IOC? How does the United States have any jurisdiction over international sport? And what we realize is that Gregory, if he goes in there and testifies to the grand jury, is actually going to become the criminal. And once they start the testimony and he starts telling them and they ask questions and questions, he's not going to lie under oath. So sooner or later, they're going to realize what he's been up to. And we have no faith in the United States Department of Justice that they're going to see him as a whistleblower. And Gregory wants to be a whistleblower. That's what he wants to do. So we sit in meetings after meetings with legal teams, and they're all advising us to just play ball with the Department of Justice. But I sit down with Gregory and I say, look, you know, if this goes wrong, this could all turn against you. What do you want to do? And he goes, we must go public. Because if we don't go public now, there's no chance that this is going to come out in time for the Rio Olympics. And I don't believe that any of this will ever be made public. I believe the United States will probably sweep this under the rug. The IOC will never do anything about it. We have to go public. So literally, he's supposed to testify to the grand jury on May 12th of 2016. We called Dean Baquet at the New York Times on May 7th, or it was May 5th, and they fly out with 2 reporters to Los Angeles. And me and Gregory sit for 3 days with Rebecca Ruiz and Michael Schertz from the New York Times. And we compiled this massive dossier. It was like 250 pages. And it detailed everything that they had done in Sochi. It went back to the London Games. It went back further beyond that. And the New York Times was able to corroborate Gregory's story. And they published it on the front page. It was Friday, I can't remember the day, I think it was May 12, 2016. And literally, this is the very same day that Gregory is giving testimony to the grand jury in the Eastern District of New York. So you can imagine they are frustrated, they are pissed off as hell, but at this point, there's nothing they can do. Gregory is now a whistleblower. So the United States government launches their own investigation, and of course, this begins Richard McLaren's investigation to prove everything that happened. It's all over the news. It's front page on the New York Times 2 days in a row. And what is startling thing about this is, as we know, Richard McLaren proves everything that Gregory said. He goes and conducts this massive investigation. He was only given, was it 56 days, Richard? 56 days to do this investigation. And the investigation is incredible. He literally is able in these 56 days to get these samples out of a laboratory. He's able, with Christian Ayot and a forensic team, to prove that the samples have been tampered with. And here, what's going on in Russia at the same time is a complete and totally discrediting campaign. I'm literally on Russian television. That is a photo. To this day, I have no idea how Russia has this photo. That was a selfie that was on my phone of Gregory and I. That's my emails that I sent to Gregory on Russian state television. I have no idea how the state of Russia has these emails. They literally are broadcasting what is going on in real time, but what we don't realize is that they had been recording all of Gregory's phone calls. They've got his family tapped, and they're literally tapping Marina, his sister, and broadcasting this out onto Russian state media to try to change the narrative, to try to reverse the evidence. And of course, things only get worse. As the scandal goes on, he's now considered Putin's enemy number one. And we're getting information from his lawyer that he's literally the top of Russia's kill list, that they want him dead more than anyone else. So Gregory, in July of 2016, after having been the single biggest whistleblower in sport history, goes into U.S. protective custody. This is him getting his fingerprints taken, his DNA samples. And this is where Gregory has remained since July of 2016. He lives in hiding. He lives, if he goes out in public, in a bulletproof vest. He lives under 24-hour protection. And not only that, this protection is no longer being held by the U.S. government. This is all through private hands, because WADA and the IOC have not lifted a single finger to help this man who blew the whistle on the biggest scandal in sport history. They have not once thanked this person. They have not once written a letter to thank him for his contribution to sport. Instead, he lives under 24/7 fear of his life. And ahead of the Winter Games in 2018, there was a call to the IOC to say, if anything were to happen to Gregory Rodchenkov, you'll never go to the Olympics again. What did the IOC do? Nothing. What did WADA do? Nothing. As we know, in 2016, Richard McLaren comes out with his final findings, and the findings are even far beyond anything that we could even imagine back when he came out with the findings ahead of the Rio Games. He finds that it's over 1,000 athletes across all of sport. He believes that this scandal has went back for decades. And of course, Russia, to this day, has still denied this conspiracy. They have never accepted, not for a single moment, that this is a state-sponsored conspiracy. Not for a single moment have they accepted any guilt in this crazy scandal. And before I venture into this, the shocking thing is not only have they accepted no guilt in this, WADA, as we know, reinstated them. And they reinstated them, completely diverting from the roadmap that they set out, which was they had to accept McLaren's findings, which they didn't. They had to accept responsibility that this was a state-sponsored doping scandal, which they didn't. And they had to turn over all their LIMS data, and when they actually turned it over, they turned it over with thousands upon thousands of fraudulent samples. And Gregory has the database. Not only that, an assistant who worked in Gregory's laboratory has the database also, and thousands and thousands and thousands of positive samples have been removed from this database, and there is not a single punishment. Nothing. They were banned from the games, but the ban was a joke. They were reinstated the day after the games, and 169 athletes competed. 2 of them were found guilty of doping. I mean, this is absolute insanity. This is how a whistleblower is being treated. Now, the only reason why Russia actually got banned from those games, because WADA didn't want to do anything. The IOC was doing anything it possibly could to get Russia back in those games. And behind those closed-door meetings of multiple people that I've spoken to, Thomas Bach was furious. He was screaming at people. He was out of his mind that Russia might be banned from those Winter Games. He even brings on 2 other investigators, Oswald and Schmidt. Now, these guys are basically there to try to disprove and discredit Richard McLaren. They're there to try to discredit Gregory, but they can't, because the evidence is the evidence. So, the card that we played to finally get Russia banned from the Olympics, even though it wasn't a ban, was Gregory kept diaries. Now, these diaries are shocking because he kept diaries for 45 years. And these diaries couldn't have been fabricated. It's literally every day of his life for 45 years, from I woke up in the morning. I had the pierogi. I had the coffee. I talked to Minister Muko. He told me to swap out these 10 samples. I then went for a run. I took my dog out. He took a poo. I went to sleep. The next day I did the same thing. So we bring these diaries to the New York Times. And the New York Times publishes these diaries, and these diaries are so damning that the IOC finally has to do something. They create their ban. And the fallout of this is that Russia has asked for Grigory's extradition. I've been told by multiple sources and his lawyer that Putin directly asked Trump to extradite him. Apparently, at one time, there was discussion to trade him for Snowden. This is real. They have charged him with multiple crimes. If he ever goes back to his country, he'll be arrested, spend the rest of his life in jail. They've frozen his assets. They seized his Dasha. I mean, this guy is persona non grata. The narrative now is that Grigory was working for American Special Services and was a CIA informant for the US government. Of course, this is not true at all. Putin has accused him of the US and CIA of drugging him to get information from him. This is real. Minister Muko has said that these diaries are a fraud and that they were all written in 6 months. And just this last year, in the beginning of 2018, at Putin's conference, Putin says, it appears that his diaries are the only evidence regarding the existence of a systematic doping program in Russia. And that he should be put in prison. The former head of the IOC, who's now the Russian Olympic Committee, called for Grigory's execution, and he's still the honorary president. This is Jim Wallin. That's Grigory's lawyer. When he visits Grigory, he has to wear a blindfold so that he doesn't know where his client is. So, this is the cost of whistleblowing. And this is completely unacceptable, that the Olympics fails to protect the biggest whistleblower in sport history, that WADA has done everything in its power to try to push this under the carpet. They have done everything that they can to try to discredit Richard McLaren and his findings. And this is the global regulator for sport. And Grigory gets to pay with his life to live in isolation for the rest of his days with a target on his back. Not only that, what the IOC did was a complete fraud. They handed out lifetime bans to 43 athletes. But when they handed out these bans, they knew that they couldn't be upheld. Not only that, they were working with Francois Clarat, who was also working with the IOC and WADA to try to help them get back into the games. The same lawyer, the same law firm, working for the IOC, WADA, and Russia. I mean, unbelievable. And this is allowed. So, I ask you all here today, what is the point of an anti-doping system? What is the point of WADA when this is what happens to a whistleblower? When the single largest sporting fraud in history that went on for decades was punished by a slap on the wrist, by nothing? Why even have a system? You realize they filed lawsuits against Grigory. He's being sued by a billionaire. Richard McLaren is being sued. I mean, this is a total and complete fraud. So all of you in this room, especially the athletes, are the only ones who can change this system. Because if the athletes stand up, and the athletes have the gumption to boycott the games, if the athletes don't tolerate this kind of bullshit from the IOC, then perhaps there can actually be change in this system. But until the athletes actually have the courage to do that, there will be maybe never another Gregory Rodchenkov. And if there is another Gregory Rodchenkov, the same thing will happen to him. Becky Scott is sitting in this room. She was bullied by WADA. She was bullied by the exact same organization that was supposed to protect her, that was supposed to protect clean athletes, that was supposed to fight for them. So, I ask you all here today, what is the purpose of clean sport, of fighting for clean sport, if this is the result of what happens when somebody comes forward and blows the whistle in this kind of capacity? And on a lighter note, that's me winning the Academy Award. And, this was an incredibly humbling and amazing honor to be recognized in this way. But I think what was so hard about this for me was not only was Gregory not able to be there with me, is that I've lost a friend through this. I can no longer see this person. In order to communicate with him, I have to communicate with him through his lawyers. I have to go through all sorts of circles. I don't have his phone number. I have no idea where this guy is, and I'm basically get to keep in touch with him to, here and there to find out whether or not he's okay. And so this incredibly humbling award was also just a very mixed thing for me, because Gregory and I worked together so hard on this. And the man who brought forward this evidence, who was so courageous to do so, has really had to pay with his life. And that's the last time I got to see Gregory. That was taken about a year and a half ago. We were able to arrange a meeting, and he remains in very positive spirits. He remains in good spirits. And he remains very optimistic that there actually will be true punishment for this scandal, and that one day he'll be able to work again, because he's continued throughout this entire thing to continue to bring forward evidence. And not once has WADA asked him if he has additional evidence. Even through this entire thing of the limb system going on right now, they've never once came to Gregory Rodchenkov and said, "Can you help us? Do you have more evidence?" WADA, they don't want to hear from Gregory Rodchenkov. It's absolutely unbelievable. And yet this guy continues every single day to keep trying to right the wrongs that he committed, and to keep trying to set the record straight. And I applaud many of you in this room who I know are thankful to this man, and I know are working to change this system that sadly has been a fraud. Thank you.
Thanks very much for that, Brian. Just to note that he is flown directly from Istanbul, so incredible to do that. Our next speaker is Damien Larin from the World Anti-Doping Agency, and Damien is going to give a short presentation on confidential information.
Hi everyone, it's a very challenging position to be in after that presentation. Congratulations, Brian, on your Oscar. I'm sure it was a very humbling experience. You asked the question, why is WADA worth preserving? And I'm here, and I'm proud to be here to talk to you about a subject that I think is vitally important, and that's the protection of whistleblowers in sport. Hopefully I can bring a bit of energy tonight. I know people are tired, it's late, but I think the subject matter deserves it. It deserves your attention. And that's what I'm here to do today. So, as I said, my name is Damien Larin. I'm the Confidential Information Manager within WADA's Intelligence and Investigations Department. I joined WADA approximately a year and a half ago after having worked over a decade in Canada's national security sector. The reason I joined WADA is because I wanted to be part of building a global whistleblower program that I believe can have a significant impact on anti-doping in sports. Now, the majority of my career has been spent working with vulnerable people who come forward with sensitive information and managing the protection aspects around that complex issue. Today, I'd like to speak to you about 3 subjects briefly. The power of human intelligence, so what's the impact that whistleblowers can have in sport. I'd like to talk to you a little bit about the practical aspects of our process in terms of whistleblower protection. And I'd also like to leave you with just a brief snapshot of the future of whistleblowing in sport, at least according to us, in terms of how we see it. Now, we know, not just in sports, but in many domains, whether it be in politics or corporate corruption, whistleblowers have an incredible ability to expose entire systems of abuse. And I think the reason that they can have such an impact is because they're often intimately aware of, and in certain cases intimately involved in the types of abuses that they're trying to expose. So they can give us a real insider's perspective into these entire systems. And I think it's important that you don't just take my word for it in terms of the impact that they can have. Every major intelligence and I&I investigations, intelligence and investigation department investigation, was started by a whistleblower, by whistleblower information, or benefited from major contributions from whistleblowers. The thing that we learn through this process, and we're always learning and trying to develop and adapt, is that whistleblower management, and particularly when it comes to protection, it's not a part-time job, it's a full-time job, and it takes full-time dedicated personnel in order to do it right. So in order to do it right, we developed a dedicated unit called the Confidential Information Unit. And this unit has a responsibility to protect our sensitive information, our confidential information, but it also has the responsibility to protect those assets, those relationships with those whistleblowers. And obviously, I think as Bryan showed in his presentation, people have it takes a tremendous amount of courage to step forward, and these people are vulnerable. So it's important that we protect them and we protect their information. Now, our program also has a proactive capability. So we just don't want to have that defensive aspect. We want to go out and we want to collect intelligence. We want to develop sources of information, we want to build on those relationships, and we want to feed that information back into our investigations so that this information just doesn't remain stagnant, so that it can really kind of push that investigation to expose doping forward. If you haven't heard of it, our main program for collecting this information is called Speak Up. And Speak Up is a global communication platform where anyone, anywhere in the world, who has allegations on doping, can contact our organization and our department in a secure and anonymous fashion. It's important to mention that they can contact us anonymously, but they also can choose to identify themselves. And when they identify themselves, well, that begins this whole process of discussion and collaboration. And those people might become whistleblowers in the future. Now, I'd like to take a moment just to thank the people that have contributed to that program, that have written us in the past. I'd like to thank the people who continue to write us on a regular basis. But I'd also really like to encourage those people who are on the fence to come forward, to speak up. I know that there's a lot of criticism of our organization. I'm in a department that's independent and autonomous within our organization, and we're really fighting to collect this information and to push that limit forward from within the system. I think if we didn't have programs like Speak Up, a lot of these allegations would go unheard, unactioned, unsaid. So it's important that people understand that there's a face and there's a team that are dedicated to encouraging you to come forward. And hopefully by describing a little bit about our process and the lengths that we go to protect people, it'll encourage those people to come
Like protecting
forward.
Gregory? The lengths that WADA went to protect Gregory?
I'm sorry, but I'm in the middle of my presentation. We can take Q&A after. I think that's what we're here for. Now, in terms of our whistleblower protection process, I'd just like to give you a little bit of insight. So the first step in our process is an evaluation process. And I think it's important to evaluate people's motivations. Because ultimately people come to this process with different motivations. People have altruistic, really good motivations. They want to have a true impact on change. But humans are complex, and sometimes we tend to forget that issue. And I think in Bryan's documentary, he really showed how Gregory is a very complex person. And we need to understand those complexities because they can affect the quality of the information we receive, but they can also really affect the way that we can protect whistleblowers and that kind of unpredictability issue. The second issue we looked at is suitability. Not everybody has the psychological makeup to deal with that type of pressure. It's not a one-size-fits-all model, but it's important to understand people's motivations and their psychological impact. But it's also important to understand their personal circumstances. I mean, whistleblowing it takes a big implication, a big involvement, depending on the cases. And so if people don't have the right circumstances, we don't want to put them in a situation that they're not comfortable with. Now, the second step of our process in terms of evaluation is risk versus reward. So we have to evaluate the risk towards the individual versus the potential impact of their information. And kind of a guideline that I've used throughout my career is just because you can do something doesn't mean you necessarily should. It seems a bit strange, but I think when it comes to risk, you really have to maintain that type of mentality. Because sometimes we get distracted by that ultimate objective, that shiny object, the impact of what we're doing. And we forget in risk, you need to be sober. You need to take a step back and you need to evaluate if it's worth it, if that impact and that risk to the individual is really worth putting them in that position. And so this is something that keeps me sober and keeps me really assessing that throughout. It's important to know that it's a collaborative process, so we work with people to kind of determine this in terms of this conversation. Now, every whistleblower relationship at WADA has an aspect of rights and responsibilities. All the rights and responsibilities are available in our whistleblower program, which is available on our website. I encourage you to read it if you're interested. It's an interesting document. But essentially what it boils down to is their expectations for us and our expectations for them. Okay, and it's important to have that conversation because before you get into this, you have to have a clear understanding of what you're getting into. And that's a collaborative process, as I said. We need to be able to have those conversations, and it's really vital. One of the key aspects of protecting whistleblowers is protecting the spread of their information. And we do that in the intelligence business and only providing information to people on a need-to-know basis. So the people who need to know that information will have access to it. And we're very obsessive about this. It's a really fundamental piece of what we do in my department. And we do that even on the level internally, in that my unit, the confidential information unit, works directly with the investigations unit. But the investigations unit do not know the identity of our whistleblowers. And what that allows us to do is to have the ultimate kind of pull-the-plug veto power in my unit. So if the investigations unit is suggesting they go out and do an interview, and this is something that could potentially jeopardize our whistleblowers, well then I'm going to stop that and I'm going to pull the plug. And we can do that, and we can put those brakes on in such a way that the person's identity remains confidential. So you can imagine the lengths that we go to do that internally. You can imagine when it comes to providing that information to organizations outside of our department, we go to even greater lengths to protect that information and to compartmentalize it from a security perspective. Now this is really the nuts and bolts of once the whistleblower relationship is developed, we develop a tailor-made, unique development plan. And a big part of that is a security plan. We want to make sure that we can address issues of communication security, logistics. I can't go into the details of this, but it's really something that we do with our whistleblowers. Ultimately we may be the experts on security and we can provide guidance, but we're not the experts on that individual themselves. We need to know what can potentially put those people at risk. We need to have that type of conversation because there's certain things that we may not be aware of. Now, I said I want to leave you with just a brief snapshot of where we're going with all of this because I think it is important to build these programs. We've been seeing anti-doping organizations, kind of invest in their intelligence and investigations capability, And I think that's really positive. But I do think that there's more investment that can be had. I think that we really need to build a global intelligence network. Our goal is to build a whistleblower network with our partners, a network of whistleblower managers. Because as I said, I think we can have a global impact. But as I said also, it's not something that can be done part-time. It takes a full-time implication. It takes the right type of personnel. It takes good policies. It takes the right types of tools to be able to do that job. And if we're going to do it, and if we're going to do it right, we really need to keep that sustained effort. Now, hopefully what I've been able to show you today in my presentation is that human intelligence is really powerful. Whistleblowers can have a great impact. It is a risky proposition, and we need to manage that risk, and we need to be able to step away and step out if the parameters for engaging in these types of relationships aren't there. But when you can manage that risk, it is worth it. It's a collaborative process. There's not a one-size-fits-all. It's a two-way street. We work with people. We don't dictate to them. We don't put them in positions where they're uncomfortable. It's important that we're on the same page. And finally, this is a collective responsibility. We're in it. We're invested in it. I work with an incredible, dedicated group of people who chose to work in these units, and we hope you'll join us in building this global network of whistleblowers. Thank you.
Thanks, Damien, for that. And Damien and Bryan will be joining us later for the Q&A. Our next speaker is Bonita. Bonita, without delay, I'll just let you go straight forward to it. Bonita is the... Okay, yeah.
Is that the
Great.
thing? Can we just press this?
Yeah, great.
Okay. First of all, no one can compare with Grigory Rodchenkov's experience, and or even Yuliya and Vitaly. But I have been through the whistleblower experience and still going through it, and that's really what was the central core of my message tonight, is that you don't actually stop being a whistleblower. But just one thing to Bryan, you wondered how come the Russians got hold of your text messages and emails. I suggest you read my book, because there's a phrase in there where I talk about how James Pavitt, who's the ex-deputy director of operations for the CIA and who became a highly paid consultant to one of the people about whom I sort of whistle blew, he said, if we have your phone, we have everything. So that's how it works. Just ask Edward Snowden, I guess. You'll see from the title of my talk, and where do we point? We had the trouble this morning. It's not working. Probably.
Green button.
Sorry?
Green button.
I'm pressing the green button. That's it. Great, thank you. Is blowing a whistle worth the risk? Well, spoiler alert, the answer is yes, but it's not all there is. In my view, a whistleblower is someone who's in the room. It's not someone like Football Leaks. It's someone who's taken the action to blow the whistle, knowing that if they don't, nothing is ever going to change, and most likely things will get worse. And that just as the media is the fourth pillar of democracy, whistleblowing is the fifth pillar. And whistleblowers do what they do, having everything to lose and absolutely nothing to gain. But let's move to that dark side. Vitaly mentioned yesterday that about 75% of his experience has been positive and 25% negative, which actually is pretty good. But for those who don't know my story, this slide gives you an idea of what I said before I was sacked from my job, almost 10 years ago, as Head of Corporate and Public Affairs for Football Federation Australia, which was then one of the bidders for the 2018-2022 World Cup. I didn't contextualise it in time in terms of being a whistleblower. From my perspective, I was just raising concerns appropriately, internally, to my manager, to my boss, who was the CEO, and to his boss, the chairman, with problems I had with what we were doing, with questions I had about why we were doing it, and particularly in the context that we were spending $50 million of taxpayers' money. However, the outcome from those uncomfortable observations and questions was I lost my job about 10 months before that infamous vote. But as it turned out, I was right. To show you what the life of a whistleblower, far away from the experiences of what we've just heard, is like, I'm going to share a timeline of what I've gone through. Starting with the period 2010 to 2015, which is when I last spoke to Play the Game. I think when I did last speak to Play the Game in 2015, most people thought, oh, well, that FIFA stuff's over. Because at that time we'd had the May arrests, the Garcia inquiry, we knew what it was around, he called me unreliable. The Swiss investigations had started, Blatter and Platini were effectively gone, there was a new FIFA election coming up, and somehow the life of a FIFA whistleblower would go back to normal. But it didn't. In the next 3 years, and this is just sort of picking out phrases about things that were said about me, the FIFA and football story more broadly continued to unfold. There were more indictments. The Garcia report was released, and for those of you not familiar with that, the Garcia report found that Russia did nothing wrong, Qatar did nothing wrong, Australia had probably the most dodgy of bids, which is probably not far from accurate, inaccurate I should say, and the two people who were most castigated in that Garcia report was me and one other person. I was termed unreliable because I had spoken to the media, but it's classic. If no one will take any notice of you, you do go and speak to the media. And the other person, in absolute disgrace for the person who is now Judge Garcia of the New York Court of Appeals, he spent 22 pages of his report, which took 21 months to compile, and $6 million of football's money. He spent 22 pages going through her personal life, which was absolutely nothing to do with what her information was about. It's an absolute disgrace, and as you can see, it still makes me angry on her behalf. Also coming out at that time was a book called The Ugly Game. They won an award. They won the most prestigious award in the UK for it. But it was based on two writers looking for an end and not really looking at the evidence. The evidence didn't support what they said it did. It had some evidence in there. It was evidence of Mohammed bin Hammam giving away a lot of money, but it wasn't about Mohammed bin Hammam buying the World Cup for Qatar. Other things are, I only wrote a book to make money. Well, actually, I guess I did write a book, and all proceeds from me go to the cerebral palsy football team in Australia. I went to a conference and someone complained because I got paid to speak at it. It's the one and only conference I did get paid to speak at. And if any of you are small business owners in this room, which I am as a publisher, I had to pay someone for a week to do my job while I was away. And yet people sort of complained about that. And we're now up to this year, and we've still got 65 days to go. The first one's a funny little one. There's a WhatsApp group of journalists around who are interested in these types of issues, and they were debating whether I should join the WhatsApp group. And they decided that I shouldn't join it because I'm not a writer. I've actually written 2 books and co-written a third. I'm not a journalist, that's true, I don't have a paid job as a journalist, but to say that I'm not a writer is a bit of a far-fetch. She can't be trusted because she speaks out. All the usual sorts of things that are said about whistleblowers. There's even one there that says, we want nothing to do with you. Do you want to know who that came from? Women in football in the UK. Women in football in the UK. They don't want anything to do with me because, I don't know, it can only be because I'm a FIFA whistleblower. That's the only thing I can think of. To give you an idea of what all of that sort of terminology and things that are said about you over all of that period of time, because we're now looking at almost 10 years as like, I did a word cloud of it. So just sort of think about all of those things going through your head all the time. For a person who's a lone individual without the backing of corporate lawyers, which newspapers and journalists have. My point is this, for almost 10 years, like most whistleblowers, I've been the subject of gossip, innuendo, sexism, racism, ageism, abuse and vile commentary in the media, online forums and social media, and institutionally within powerful organisations, starting with FIFA, from former colleagues, acquaintances, journalists, people who've never met me, and even people such as some of the examples I gave of those who I thought were friends. And that's just what I know of. When we look at some of the other things that have happened, I've also been the subject of surveillance, including by one of the other bidders in the 2018-2022 process, both before and after my employment. I was advised by the Australian government not to go to Russia for the World Cup last year because Russia doesn't come out too kindly from my book. I have been bugged, hacked, burgled, ambushed and denigrated. I've had fake websites set up in my name. I've had fake Bitcoin accounts set up in my name. I've had fake Twitter, Facebook and LinkedIn accounts. The most recent only being 6 weeks ago. So this isn't something that happened 9 years ago, it's 6 weeks ago. So prevalent are the fake accounts in my name that the Swiss authorities and I now contact each other when it happens because they're absolutely convinced that it coincides with when they're doing something to do with the case. And they're either talking to someone or something's happened. I don't know that side of it, but does seem to be a relationship. All of these things take enormous time, money, huge doses of emotional and physical energy to deal with it each and every time. For example, when you've got a fake website in your name and a fake Bitcoin account in your name, it took about 8 weeks and $8,000 to $10,000 in legal fees and other things to get that shut down. You have to prove that you are who you are. Thank God my name's not sort of, I don't know, John Smith or something. But it's a common experience for those who blow the whistle. Read anything about or by a whistleblower and they will tell a similar story. And as we heard from Bryan and as we've heard from Yuliya and Vitaly, I'm one of the lucky ones. I haven't had to leave my country. It hasn't affected my marriage. I still have a house. My children have grown up to be highly educated, well-adjusted, healthy members of society. Although similar to Yuliya's mother, one of my sons is a medical doctor and was working in an emergency at Royal Prince Alfred Hospital in Sydney, which is one of the biggest hospitals there. And he had a patient who, when he saw his name, refused to be treated by him because I was his mother. This man bleeding, and he wanted another doctor, but there was no other doctor on duty that night. To give you another example, here's an excerpt from a recent article by a finance industry whistleblower in Australia. His experience started more than 6 years ago. And you'll see, I think the telling sentence there for me is my demons were loudest at night when the lights were out and the world shuts down because my brain keeps thinking. I have a lot of sympathy for that. And this one from a University of Maryland professor of government who has worked with many whistleblowers. In the full journal article, he goes on to say that most whistleblowers are stuck in static time because they never see a resolution to what they've actually blown the whistle about. In other words, the whistleblower did the right thing, but those who did the wrong thing are not brought to justice. I only have to mention a few FIFA Executive Committee members or their enablers who gave them plausible deniability to remind you of how true that is. Jack Warner, Franz Beckenbauer, Fedor Radman, Warui Makudi, Reinhold Tamari, Amadou Diakite, Rafael Seguro, Vitaly Mutko, Igor Shvalov, who has been largely ignored in everything and shouldn't be, and Ahmed Al-Sabah, just a few names. And these are disappearing now. Whistleblowing is a risky act that results in trauma for the whistleblower. You are a disruptor, you're not wanted by anyone, you are not anything, you can't be a writer, you can't be this, you can't be that, you don't belong anywhere, you're alone, you do feel alienated, you are like a displaced person trying to establish a new normal, and I don't say that with any disrespect to displaced persons. My parents were displaced people. I know that for me it has taken an enormous toll in so many ways and continues to do so. It also takes an almighty and sustained bout of resilience to still be standing. The one thing that helps, and this gets back to the positive aspect of it, the one thing that helps is knowing why you did it, which returns us to the question about whether whistleblowing is worth the risk. The preliminary questions could also be, do you regret this and would you do it again? And the answer to those questions is no, I don't regret it, and yes, I would do it again. Therefore, it's worth the risk. For me, talking about what was going on within football as I experienced it, and because I was in the room and heard and saw so much, it wasn't a matter of choice. It's something you do not only because it is the right thing to do, it's the only thing to do. Thanks.
So now what I'm going to do is just to give us a minute to set up the stage here, and we're going to invite the speakers back up for a question and answer session, including the Stepanovs themselves. So just give us a minute and we'll set that. Thank you. So just while we're waiting for Bryan to rejoin us, I just want to ask Vitaly and Yuliya about the theme of today's session, blowing the whistle. Was it worth it?
Hello. Can you wait for Bryan?
Yes. Yeah, do you want to wait? Yeah.
Can I just say one more thing there?
Yeah, absolutely.
I forgot to mention when I was making the introductory remarks, one of the things that Bryan said about Grigori was that he thought perhaps no one who had won a gold medal had ever done it fairly. I just want to put one dispute to that, because in the room I have a compatriot whom I've never met, but he's a triple gold medalist, and I believe he's a clean athlete. I just want to make that point. James Tompkins, thank you.
Yeah, 1 minute. 1 minute? Yeah.
Yes, I would like to make a comment about Bryan's presentation. To Bryan.
Sorry. Sorry to keep you waiting.
Vitaly has told me now twice to wait for you. So,
my apologies. I flew in from Istanbul
going to catch a break for a second. My apologies.
What was the question?
The question was on today's paper and in today's session, blowing the whistleblower, was it worth the risk?
I just would like to make a comment about Mr. Fogel's presentation. I may lose some of you as friends, but I just would like to say,
uh-oh.
it's not by me, it's by an unknown author, and it just says, if you want to ruin the truth, stretch it. And I'm sorry, what was your question again?
About the cost and the risks of whistling and the impact that it had on you and your family. Do you want me to come?
Yeah. Our experience, I can say I'm not regret that I become a whistleblower, because I just want to tell the truth about what's happening in Russia. Because I was seeing and I was have experience with what's happening in Russia, and I saw how many unfair, like not a clean competition, like it's 5 athletes selected to be dirty during the competition, and like I feel like I should do something, because it was many athletes around me who was complaining about like why we doing this, why our coaches don't give us other program, why we still using prohibited substances, why we cannot like don't use it. And like so many Russian athletes caught now, and we still continue using it. And they was crying during the time when I was banned. And I was like, maybe I can do something, maybe we can do something, but we probably should do something. And because of my husband, of course, I became a whistleblower, and he helps me very well. And I was very upset when all these athletes just turned against me after when they were crying to me like how everything is bad, why we're doing this, and then they started to go public and say that I'm a liar, like what I'm saying it's not truth. It was very hard time in the beginning, but now when it's so many years past, I'm glad that I become whistleblower, and if I have another chance to do it, I will do it.
We've got kind of 15 minutes maximum for questions, and I'm going to open them out to the floor. We have roving mics on, and we'll start with questions. So can we have a mic to the front?
Thank you. Roger Pelkey, University of Colorado. Damien, I want to say thank you for being here. One of the strengths of this conference is that representatives of sports organizations come and face critics and hard questions. And I want to make sure you have a chance to respond to Bryan's presentation directly and some of the claims he made about WADA's support or lack of support for Chenkov, because there's some pretty strong claims there about not asking for evidence. And since you're central to dealing with whistleblowers, it would be great to hear you speak directly to those issues and maybe listen to you guys have an exchange with each other.
I think the first thing I would say is just the ultimate respect to anybody who, whether it's someone like myself who works behind the scenes, part of a team, but particularly for those members of the media, filmmakers who work really hard to expose these systems of abuse. We may see it from different angles. Ultimately, my position as confidential information manager is to try and keep that information confidential. protect the identities of people so that they can remain in the shadows, but that their information ultimately is used for good and to expose. I don't want to talk specifically about Gregory because as a confidential information manager, I don't want to speak specifically about people who've come forward. I have to respect the protection that those people are under and their information. The only thing I would mention with regards to Bryan's presentation is that systems evolve after those abuses are exposed. It forces the system to change and to evolve. And I'm part of a team that's ever expanding. People who are professionals, intelligence, investigations, dozens and dozens of years of experience have chosen to work with whistleblowers, to investigate these things let
me ask you this, Damien, because what you're saying is not true. WADA has never once thanked Gregory Rodchenkov or reached out to him for his evidence. They have never offered to protect him. They have never offered to employ him. I mean, this guy is sitting on a mountain of evidence that WADA has no interest in getting. Not only that, after Icarus came out, you guys never even thanked me. You didn't even say, hey, thanks for helping to expose the biggest scandal in sport history. Thanks, because we as the regulator are grateful to somebody like you and Gregory Rodchenkov. Instead, you guys have done everything you can to shove this under the carpet. I don't understand what you're talking about, protecting whistleblowers. Who have you protected? Explain it to me.
Respectfully, Bryan, I'm not here to work to thank you.
I'm just saying that you have you guys respected.
So, I'm here to work to protect whistleblowers. I'm here to develop the program. I'm here to demonstrate to you guys, the professional nature of the program, the lengths that we go to protect information. And I would also say, Bryan, I said that I wouldn't speak about Gregory in particular, but I think my point is that you made your film a few years ago. The system evolves. We have to protect people's confidentiality. You said that you haven't been in touch with him for a number of years. Things move on. Things happen. You may not be intimately aware of every single detail of how things go.
And I want to get the audience involved as much as possible. So I'll take another question from here.
My question is mainly for Damien, because I heard something during your presentation that I wanted to ask about, which is you're sort of judging on the human intelligence side, when whistleblowers are coming, you're sort of aware that they can have different motivations. It worries me from that perspective, because if you were doing that with someone like Bonita, are you saying that because you think that maybe revenge is a factor or something like that because she's been sacked, are you then verifying the fidelity of that information they're giving? And if you are, then what does that motivation really have to do with anything? Because I understand that maybe inherently you feel that it's more unreliable, but I think that someone can have impure motivations sometimes as a whistleblower, but still be telling the truth. So I just wanted to ask that because it sounds like a very dangerous premise to me.
I'm sorry, I just want to add about Mr. Rodchenkov. When I came to sport, when I came to professional sport, and I became a member of Russian team, I heard about two people, two doctors. One of them was Mr. Rodchenkov, another was Mr. Portugalov. And I was selected to be prepared with Mr. Portugalov. And from Mr. Portugalov, I learned that they compete with Mr. Rodchenkov about whose athlete beat whose athlete. Like Mr. Portugalov was preparing me, Mr. Rodchenkov was preparing another 800 meters runner, and they were making money for this. And we were like horses for them. And I just asked them, we think we are horses for them. And Mr. Portugalov answered me, it's so boring to watch a competition, but when we have money, it's more interesting. And another thing about Mr. Rodchenkov, if he wants to be a whistleblower, why he not came before he was fired, before we came out with our truth. He has so many years doping athletes. He has so many years cover up this doping. Why he not came whistleblower so many years ago? He can stop this doping in Russia if he wanted, but he was cover up this.
Well, he would have been killed.
Sure, thank you. Thank you for the question about motivations. I think it's important to address that issue. I think what I'm saying is, first of all, in terms of corroborating information, absolutely, that's a principal part of what we do. We need to corroborate the information, to get other sources of information, to make sure that you know, what we're getting is authentic. But I think what I'm trying to address is just people are complex and they come with a whole combination of motivations. And I'm not trying to say one is right, one is wrong. We need to understand that. We need to understand that process. And you know, in terms of, just let me highlight one example. If someone's coming forward from a perspective of revenge, because that may happen, and that might be a primary motivator. If someone you know, is coming forward from perspective of revenge, they might be more prone to, you know, I said taking a second sober thought and stepping back and understanding what the objective is. In that case, that person's objective might blind them, okay, with respect to you know, having a specific outcome. So it's important to have that conversation, to discuss. And as I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all. I think it's just ultimately about understanding where people are coming from, what motivates them, to share our perspective, to share that exchange on expectations. And yeah, just to have a conversation about it. Hopefully I didn't portray it as you know, there's the right or wrong. That's not it. It's just about understanding why someone is coming forward. And as I said, ultimately for me, it's encouraging people to come forward to start that conversation.
I just want to add something to that. As a person who's been through it all, media that I've talked to, authorities in 5 countries, and the Garcia inquiry, for what that was worth, they all go through motivation, and you expect it. And as a whistleblower, I don't have a problem with that. And especially because the narrative that goes out about you is that, you know, as I showed, you're incompetent, you're bitter and twisted, you're all of these things. Of course, they need to test that. And at the end of the day, if the information you're giving is correct, and it is your true and honest account of it, and all of those sorts of things, and you've got documents to support it as well, then it doesn't matter if that's been tested.
Can I just add one quick point? I just wanted to make sure, I didn't want to misrepresent too, so many people are coming forward for altruistic reasons because they want to have an impact. And I don't want to misrepresent that and to say that, you know, people are coming forward for the wrong reasons. We just need to do our due diligence, that's all.
Next question.
It's me?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. By all respect, Bryan, you talked about the biggest whistleblower in the history of sports. I know Gregory very well, as you know, for many years, and I have total respect for what he has done in the aftermath of the Russian doping scandal. I totally agree with that. But to be honest, my personal opinion on that is, and that is not because we did a documentary about them, but because I learned Vitaly and Yuliya in 2014, and they had not at all any reason to escape from Russia. They did it for altruistic reasons for years. Vitaly was the person who brought information to WADA since 2010. He had to take enormous risks for his life and for his wife, and later also for his son. I think this is for me the real altruistic whistleblowing, and I have fully respect for these persons I met in my life, and that made my life very different because I met those fantastic people. I don't want to say it the first time. And the other thing is a question, and that now I agree with one other point. You are right from my point of view that WADA had done a very bad job on saying thank you to the whistleblowers, and Vitaly told me that story several times. Hopefully I'm right, Vitaly, that Craig really never approached personally Vitaly and Yuliya. You have to imagine that, because they have been the initial people who did the whole thing we made it blow up. So that is, for me, even worse to understand that. And maybe you can, Damien, you can send my warmest regards to Craig and ask him again why he failed to do that. It's now 5 years after 2014, he's still not said one time thank you to those two people on the podium here. But now my question comes after my comment. Damien, you are obviously working with Günther Jange, am I right? So,
yep.
I heard from different sources that you have a lot of information from whistleblowers all over the world. I deal also with, in my job as a journalist, with a lot of whistleblowers in the meantime, but I heard that you have 10 times more, and you cannot deal with the whole a big number of whistleblowers because you are simply a very small unit, which you cannot deal with all these cases. So I would like to understand, is it correct that many of those cases you cannot follow up because you have simply not the person in charge who can do that?
I think maybe at first I'd just address the first comment. You know, I can't comment on you know, who said thank you. I wasn't there. I've been here a year and a half, but I can say that I absolutely respect Vitaly and Yuliya for coming forward. I think it's incredibly courageous. I won't speak about any specific cases, and I certainly wouldn't speak about their case, because ultimately, you know, it's about protecting the people that come forward. But I can say thank you on behalf of my organization, on behalf of my department, on behalf of Günther. A huge amount of respect for the two. I'm not really sure I got your question in terms of resources and the amount of information we have and what we're doing, you know, to manage that. I think it's a good sign in terms of your comment that people are coming forward and they're providing, you know, providing these allegations. In our department, we do tend to work on some of the higher level cases, the more complex cases, because we do have the capability. As I said in my presentation, other anti-doping organizations, other international federations are starting to develop that capability, and more we're reaching out to collaborate with those organizations and develop that capability. Because I think it is a global responsibility. You know, ultimately we're invested in it, but if we can work with solid partners and if we can encourage them, we can provide them with the tools, help them with their programs, yeah, that's what we're looking to do. I don't know if that answered the question.
Yeah, I mean, you know, Hayo's work has been outstanding and astounding, and this story would have never been brought to light if it wasn't for Hayo's work. And you know, it's incredibly disappointing, Damien, that you sit up here today and defend WADA, and yet I think almost everybody in this room knows the inherent fraud of your organization and what it has actually done to protect whistleblowers. I mean, even the first investigation that Richard Pound of McLaren and Gunther brings forward, they had substantial information that the scandal extended far beyond athletics. And yet WADA quashed that from their report and didn't allow them to put it in. I mean, so it's just, it's unbelievable that you know, that you're up here, you know, saying that you're out there to defend whistleblowers, and you've done nothing to defend whistleblowers.
One final question, Aaron. One final question. Okay, very quick, please.
Good afternoon or good evening. It's late. My name is Rob Keeler. I'm former Deputy Director General of WADA. I was responsible for the Russian roadmap, and now I'm running an organization called Global Athlete. I want to make a comment, then I'm going to ask a question.
Very briefly.
I will be very brief, don't worry. I think both Yuliya and Vitaly need a round of applause because they're great. I also think Gregory Chenkov deserves a round of applause because he's a brave whistleblower. This is not about dividing whistleblowers. This is about the inaction of certain organizations that have not continued to follow up and support these people, everything they've done to bring justice to light. And don't focus on each other, focus on the actions and the lack of actions for the organizations that have not moved forward. Additional information. And my question to each of the panelists is why do you think either the IOC or WADA has not continued to ask questions to Vitaly and Yuliya and Gregory? Why do you think, if there's more information, which we're hearing you say they have, why we aren't asking more questions, and why everyone in this room is not making people accountable to the organizations? Whistleblowers should be celebrated, not going between each other. Congratulations to you guys, but answer those questions. Why?
And just, I will answer very briefly if you can. Start with.
You want me to answer about IOC and WADA? I don't really know enough about them. I'm strictly a football girl. But the short answer would be, in fact, that I think you only have to look at where the power of world sport lies. And that lies with a couple of nation states. It is increasingly pivoting away from the countries that we've been used to, and it's with countries that don't have the same governance standards, dare I use that word again, because that's what it all gets back to. They don't have the same governance standards, and FIFA's a great example. 211 member nations, and they've always had governance at the lowest common denominator rather than trying to bring nations up. So when you have countries such as Russia, the Middle East, China, Azerbaijan, Kazakhstan running world sport, not being rude to any nationals who might be from those countries, it is going to be a different sort of playing field that we're dealing with.
Well, first off, I wouldn't ever comment on questions we are or aren't asking to people who are or aren't talking to us, because ultimately it's not about the public forum. It's not about advertising that aspect for me, because we need to protect those people's identity. We need to protect those projects, those investigations that we're working on. And I wouldn't be doing my job as a confidential information manager if I didn't have their interests first and foremost. It's not about me or defending my organization. It's about protecting the people who have the courage to come forward. With respect to defending my organization, honestly, I don't really take that comment. I'm here to talk about what we are doing. I'm here to talk about the Speak Up program. I'm here to talk about the people who are writing us every day, to provide their information at risk to themselves, the people who are speaking out. But we're listening. I'm listening. I wanted people to understand that there's a face, there's a person there having that conversation with them, encouraging them to come forward, thinking about the risks they're taking sober decisions, and having that conversation with them. Thank you.
I just would like to say about myself. Before I met Hayo in April 2014, I didn't even know what word whistleblower means. I don't think WADA knew as well. Hayo explained to me. I mean, the first time I heard it, I'm like, okay, whistleblower, some kind of referee. I was close, but not. But I came to the anti-doping agency to fight doping. At one point, I got fired. But I still believed in fair competition. I never saw myself as a whistleblower. Then I mentioned yesterday that day when we were facing divorce. That day I won the biggest fight of my life. Yuliya became a whistleblower with me. 5 years of fights, communications, seeing what's around us, seeing what organizations are doing or not doing, but it was within our family that we won that fight. And for that reason, I think if we could do it, anybody can do it. So after that, it was easy. We were united. So why WADA or the IOC or any other organization doesn't come to us and ask questions? Because I can't speak for other whistleblowers, because after the documentary by Hayo Zebelt was aired in December of 2014, about 1 month later, Jack Robertson came in and he said, "Can you give me everything you have?" And I said, "Sure, every single video, 2 types, one video and audio and one just audio. Here by date, when it happened, short explanation." I gave everything at that moment. From that moment on, we could only make statements. We didn't have any more evidence, and everybody behind the scenes knows that. So that's why the IOC or WADA doesn't ask us, because we simply don't have it.
I think the reason why the WADA or the IOC doesn't ask is it's very simple. It's not in their business interests. The IOC is a multi-billion-dollar company that operates in Switzerland like the Vatican. They don't report tax returns. They are immune to justice. And their business is to sell the Olympic dream as exactly that, a dream. So athletes who cheat, tainted medals, none of that is in the best interest of the IOC, which is a business to make billions of dollars, essentially exploiting its athletes that they don't pay a dime. So to keep the Olympic dream alive, they have to essentially do exactly this. Try to push any scandal under the carpet, march on as usual, and their boys club or their 87 or whatever members that sit on their board, it is not in their best interest to help whistleblowers. It's not in their best interest to expose sporting frauds. It's not in their best interest to do any of that. Their only best interest is how to sell the Olympic Games and reap their billions of dollars of profit. And WADA is funded by the IOC. They're in their pocket. Craig Reedy is a member of the IOC. He's in bed with Thomas Bach. These two are like this. So it is not in their interest to seek further information. It's not in their interest to talk to Gregory Rodchenkov. It's not in their interest to get his evidence or to ask him how they can actually combat global anti-doping or how they can reform, because it's not in their interest of how to make their billions of dollars and protect the Olympic Games. And sadly, it's all the clean athletes of the world who get to fall by the wayside while they perpetuate their scam of the Olympic ideal and a dream, which is essentially a fraud.
And with that, I notice that I have gone over time. I would like you to join me to thank the panel.